Hey, Jessi, I really appreciate you staying awake for me. I know it's a little bit late your time out there in Rwanda. Am I right?
It's only 11 o'clock.
Only 11 o'clock. By 11 o'clock, I have tucked my son in bed. My wife has already probably fallen asleep watching Netflix. So I'm probably playing on my phone at that point in time, just reading through like the feeds like we all do, wasting time. But no, I really appreciate you being here today because I know it's International Women's Month, which is a really important time. And we had International Women's Day just the other day. And when you and I first connected through Sue over at Pink Boot Society, I could have talked to you forever in that first call. You were just showing me around where you live, telling me about your story. I'm like, wow, this is absolutely fascinating. It's the journey everybody wants to hear about. And so often when we talk to people in the craft beer industry, you talk to someone who he was a brewer at ABC Brewer and now he's at XYZ Brewery. He just kind of moved a little bit across the industry to become who he is today. But I think your journey is a little more exciting than your typical person who's kind of found success in the craft beer industry. I mean, just from the heading alone, you've created not only the first craft brewery in Rwanda, but also the first female-led brewery in the country. I mean, that is absolutely amazing. So, what part of the country are you in?
We are in Kigali, Rwanda, the capital of Rwanda, smack dab in the middle of the country.
And how long have you been there?
4 years.
Okay, now the big question. You don't have any sort of African accent right now, to my knowledge. How in the world did you end up, all the way around the world? I mean, how did that process begin?
So yeah, I have a Boston accent. I'm originally from Boston. And so I came to Rwanda 4 years ago. I was living in Boston. I'm a landscape architect by trade. And so I was in Boston. I was working for Mass Design Group as a landscape architect, and came here I was supposed to be here for 6 weeks. We did a competition for a conservation agriculture university. And there's, and so I was supposed to be here for 6 weeks. And at the end of it, we found out that we had the project. So they said, "Are you ready to move to Rwanda?" So I went back to Boston for a couple of weeks, packed my stuff up, and I basically have been here since. And now I've realized I live in Rwanda. I have a dog. I live in I have houseplants. So I've just I've been here. I was here working as a landscape architect for a couple of years, and kind of got involved in this brewery project. I was home brewing here, out of kind of necessity for good beer. And so then ended up turning that into a brewery.
Well, we've got lots more to talk about than from point A to point Z, like you just did. So, wait, let me back up for a sec. Boston to Rwanda, that is a massive move. I mean, you said you were a landscape architect by trade, but was traveling around the globe working on projects like that something you had done in your career prior, or was this, like a once in a lifetime opportunity to just move halfway across the universe?
No, I was a Peace Corps volunteer after college. So right from when I kind of, got my wings, I took off out of the States. I lived with the Ngobe tribe in Panama in the middle of the rainforest, built my own hut, bathed in the river, kind of it's like as quintessential as like the American Peace Corps experience can be. And it was and I stayed there for 4 years. Just a really great experience of my favorite Peace Corps ad says, "Do something good for the country, leave it." And it's so true. It's, by leaving America, you really get a lot of perspective of other people's perspectives around the world, other ways of living, other challenges. So that really, started me off, was 4 years living in Panama. And so from there, I worked with an organization where I got to travel around the world doing conservation research. So the kind of like international side of my life has always been there, whether it's I'm living abroad or I'm working and traveling. And so it was actually strange to me. I had been in Boston for years at the point that I ended up at Mass. And it was great because I was at, in Boston, I was with my family and my friends, but I was able to work on international projects. And so, I thought I was only coming here for 6 weeks, like I said, and, but my life tends to follow whatever course is most interesting in front of me.
So, two questions for you. Growing up in Boston, what made you first off want to join the Peace Corps? And second, did you have any sort of degree in conservation or anything in the field that you used in your experiences?
I think, my earliest memory of wanting to do Peace Corps was, I think it was like ads on TV where they showed people that, like Americans in places that look strange to me. I only knew Boston. And there was something about that whole like going to a different place and meeting different people and living a different life that was really appealing to me. So I think it was just always like, I just kind of always assumed that was what I would do. And so when the opportunity did arise, I took it. And so, so I think it was just something that I always wanted to do. And sorry, what was in the other half of that question?
Oh, did you go to school for anything related to like the conservation or, landscape architecture or?
So my undergrad's in journalism and environmental studies. Growing up, I always wanted to be a National Geographic reporter. And so I figured if I mixed journalism and environmental studies, I could get into that. And so then, but I did also work on different farms and do different like conservation and agriculture work. And so when I went to Peace Corps, that was kind of the fit, right? And the other thing is though that, I wasn't there to be some expert in, I'm fresh out of college, working with a community has lots of experience. And so it wasn't my role to be some expert. It was to help basically be a volunteer for a community and help them solve problems that they asked me to help solve. So like, one day it was, hey, there's a bug that's in my coffee. What do I do about it? And I'm like, I have no idea, but let's go figure it out. Like, let's go find the agricultural extension agent. Let's get him to come in and talk. And like, so it was really just, not being an expert in it, but being familiar with the field and just help, working with people in the community to problem solve through different things.
And in all of your Peace Corps experiences, how many different countries did you have the opportunity to help in?
Well, Peace Corps is just one. It was just Panama. So it was after Peace Corps that I got to work in Belize, Brazil, Australia, Kenya, the US, different countries that give you different ways of seeing the world.
Now, out of visiting all of those countries, was there ever that one light bulb-esque moment in your life where you just had a realization that would dictate your future, just having that sense of travel, wanting to help others? Do you have any stories that kind of touch on one moment that, shaped you more so than others?
It was probably when I was working at Earthwatch Institute. So that I was helping to coordinate researchers around the world so communities would ask questions like, why are our fisheries going downhill? Or what can we do about human wildlife conflict of like, us versus lions versus elephants or something? And so we'd work with scientists to research the issue and work with the community on resolving it. So for example, like, okay, well, if you have a conflict with, elephants, let's track the elephant migration corridor and figure out where those conflicts are going to happen so we can give that information back to you to avoid it. And so in that process, though, some of the scientists actually found cholera in a water source and were able to alert the nearby communities, like, don't drink out of this water, there's a contamination. And there was something in that process it was amazing to see how communities and scientists could work together to solve these problems, and that, things were happening in real time on the ground that help people. And meanwhile, I was kind of still in the National Geographic mindset, right? Of like, I love writing about what cool people do around the world. And that was that one moment where I said, I don't just want to write about cool people doing stuff around the world. I want to go just do the stuff. And so from that point on, it was also E.F. Schumacher's Buddhist economics essay that, really talks about, to be happy, you need to work with your hands and your mind. And I really have found that to be true. Like, I need desk and dirt, or I need like beer and brains. I need a little bit of like both sides of theory and practice in my life. And so I just kind of really looked into how could I take all the things that I love doing and turn them into something, and ended up finding landscape architecture. And so I went back to grad school in my early 30s, went back for 5 years of grad school, and that rolled into being in Rwanda.
So landscape architecture sounds like a fascinating degree. I mean, when you think landscaping, you think definitely hands-on, just, making things in the front yard or property look beautiful. So what is that degree like? How much is spent actually, let's say, like on the field, actually on the landscape versus, in a classroom?
So landscape architecture is not like, so it's not landscaping. It's more site engineering, and I don't think of myself necessarily as a landscape architect as much as I use landscape architecture as a tool to solve larger problems that I'm interested in and that I see are issues that I can apply the tool to help others solve problems. So, for example, the project I moved to Rwanda for is the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture. So the situation in Rwanda is the second highest or second most densely populated country in Africa. And the population is doubling, right? So we're going to be at an astronomical amount of people by 2050. But the land, they're not making land anymore. So how are we going to, there's already some food scarcity within the population. So then when you put double the amount of people on the same amount of land, how can we feed everyone? And so meanwhile, also Rwanda is part of the Albertine Rift and like an amazing biodiverse hotspot on the face of the earth. So how do we both feed people and keep people healthy, but also keep ecosystems going? And like this ties into the pandemic, right? We all have to wear masks now because of a crossover between nature and people. So how do you take those issues and put them together into one issue? And so that's what I use landscape architecture for, is you take these theories and these ideas and you physically place them on the face of the earth in relationship to each other. And so that, it's I get to also pick, great plants to make it look, but that's like nice at the end, but that's like putting a bow in your hair, right? It's actually the underlying kind of like concepts and problem solving that I really love to use landscape architecture for.
That's absolutely fascinating. So when you first got brought over to help with the landscape architecture project, did you foresee yourself just working there for an indefinite period of time, or what were you thinking in your head? Obviously you moved over to take on that task, but what was the term of the commitment?
Actually asked my boss that at the time. I was like, I'm putting everything in storage, but for how long? Like, should I save my cleaning agents, or like, what am I doing? And she was like, oh, you're going for 1 to 3+ years. And she was spot on, right? I just happened to be on the 3+. So no, I didn't know how long I was coming over for. I knew we were taking on a massive project by the firm taking on RICA, but I had no idea that it would, how many years, and that it would just evolve into a whole like life in Rwanda. That still does involve landscape architecture, but also now involves women's brewery.
Absolutely fascinating. So when you first came to Rwanda, and you'd been all around the world prior to this, was there any differences that surprised you or interested you, based on all your travels? That's something that just stood out as a really unique, aspect of life in Rwanda?
Everywhere is so unique and so different. It's Rwanda is part of what fascinates me is like how entrepreneurial people are. Everyone's on the hustle, right? In a way, like everyone sees opportunity and it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to go like start a business. I'm just going to go do this thing. And so that to me was, because like, I just feel like growing up in America, even though it's the whole like, oh, everybody up by their bootstraps, at the same time, I don't feel like I feel like growing up, I was taught, you get a job that fits in a predefined box you can check, and then you go work for the man and you earn your pension and you retire, and hopefully you can take a nice tropical vacation every now and then. And so being in a place where there's not a like predefined trajectory in that way necessarily, but it's like people are looking for opportunities and doing different things all the time, was to me super refreshing, and something that I've tried to adopt myself.
Have there been any unique hustles you've seen that you've never thought about before and were experiencing for the first time from other people?
Oh God, probably. It's like at this point now it's 4 years, so now it's all. I mean, if you can imagine somebody doing something, somebody's doing it, and like, and it's. here, if you need to solve a problem, you always call, you get a guy, right? Like you call someone who calls someone. There's not like, you don't Google like, where can I get blah, blah, blah in Kigali? No. You have to have a social network, because people are always coming up with stuff. And actually the pandemic was a great, like, within a day or two, I think it was, of our lockdown last year, all of Kigali just converted to delivery. And so it was amazing. You can just text this number and say, I would like, a kilo of sausages from this place, and I don't know, rice from this one, and a notebook from this one. And all of a sudden it shows up at your gate on a guy photo shows up, gives it to you, you pay him, and like, it was just magical. Or if you have a book, like we're in lockdown and people are like, oh, I need a new book to read, you call the guy, you give him the book, he runs it to your friend, so things like that would just suddenly kind of like pop up, because the need arises and people are there to kind of figure it out and make a business out of it.
So when you say a guy, you need a book, you just make that connection. Are these people you have to kind of get to know over time, or are these more so business-like operations where you can publicly find that information to get the goods or get the products you're looking for?
It's a combination. But it's like social currency in a way of, people will call and be like, hey, do you know someone who can do this? Or I'm looking for this oddball thing. Does anybody know? And there's also Facebook groups, right? So like you post something and people know how to find it. Rwandans are incredibly socially connected. And so chances are, like most things, you can find someone who can find a way to make it, build it, get it. So it's just a very, it's an intense social network.
I know pre-pandemic, I was already way too connected to social media. And I think the pandemic's only, attached me even more, which my wife doesn't love sometimes. But in Rwanda, what is the go-to social network that everybody's on, or that go-to communication app? Are there certain standards that people, get used to?
Well, Twitter is huge here. And so especially for talking to government agencies. So if you have a question for any of the ministry people, for example, like if I have a question about my visa, or the power has an issue, you get on Twitter. Wow. So Twitter is like the official medium of especially government things. And then we use WhatsApp as like the country, everybody uses WhatsApp for messaging and calling. It just works really well, I think, on kind of the technology. And this is the land of 1,000 hills. There's far more than 1,000, but like there's not a flat spot in the country. And so I think it's just like with different technology and like cell phones, it's like you get weird reception, but so I think it's just evolved to whatever works best and on phones. And so it's like Twitter and WhatsApp, and that's a good part of life.
That's fascinating how important Twitter is. I've read stories about South American countries where they've literally done the same thing as you, but it's amazing when you can reach out to people directly and they welcome that feedback. So that's awesome that there's that two-way communication going on. But, besides the pandemic, actually not besides the pandemic, about the pandemic, what are the other current things that kind of define the current state of the pandemic in Rwanda? Is everybody still wearing masks, social distancing? Where do you stand in progress?
So Rwanda was actually rated sixth best in the world for COVID response. So like everybody probably heard about New Zealand, and there's a few countries everybody heard about. Rwanda was number 6, or is number 6, right? So we're a country of 12 million people, but at the highest peak, it got up to 300 cases a day. And that caused another just utter lockdown. And so we've had, compared to other countries, minimal kind of like widespread problems. And it's a lot of, everybody wears masks, there's enforced social distancing and such. And then, when over the holidays after people traveled, there was a spike. So the government put another lockdown in order to control that. And so the cabinet meets every 2 to 3 weeks and kind of decides the next step. And so every 2 to 3 weeks, we get a Twitter message that says,
make sure you send them a tweet.
Yeah, we all wait up. And like when the pandemic first happened, every night at 10 o'clock, we waited for the Ministry of Health to release the day's testing results, and if it was like, a half an hour late, everybody would be on Twitter being like, where is it? So it's, the Rwandan response to the pandemic has been amazing. And of all places in the world to be, this is an amazing place to be. Obviously the pandemic is not great in any way, shape or form. But Rwanda has responded to it incredibly. So Rwanda is still open. So if anybody is looking to travel, visit Rwanda.
Someday I will come and definitely have a beer with you. I'm glad things are getting better there. With regard to vaccines, here in the United States, the rollout's starting to run a little bit smoother, dare I say that? What's the state of vaccines in Rwanda?
So they have just started rolling out. Rwanda is, pretty ahead of most other countries on the continent. And so Rwanda does have like a massive cold chain set up here. So we got some of the vaccines and so the first round went out and it landed and was instantly went out to all the provinces. They had it all set up. So within the first 2 days, they had this just massive campaign to vaccinate elderly, I think, frontline workers, prisoners, and like people at high risk situations. And now it's also being rolled out to tourism and to other like high contact, high kind of possibility of contagion.
Cool. Well, if you haven't got yours already, hopefully you get it soon and keep staying safe out there. Yeah, definitely. Fingers crossed for you. But let's talk about beer, because that's what brought us together. So when did you first in your life become a beer drinker? I mean, obviously, I imagine it was a little bit before, when you first had this idea for the first female-led craft brewery in Rwanda. When did beer come into your life?
I think, like a lot of Americans, it was in college that I mostly kind of like started drinking. But it was just kind of like a social thing. I don't remember when craft beer first really entered. I do remember where it was. I was at Sam Adams in Boston and we took a tour, and I just remember there were bins of malt and hops and just different things that you could touch and smell. And there was just something in that tactile experience that made me realize, like, oh, beer is made of stuff. And somebody makes it. Somebody takes ingredients and decides to make different beers. And that was just like a shift to me. So then I started, when I'd go to get some beer, I'd be like, what else is there? And so I think it was, a small kind of like step. It was actually probably, I think it was now 7 years ago or so. My younger sister actually got my father a learn how to home brew class for Christmas. So the two of them went off and like did the, learn a homebrew class. And my dad came home with the 20-liter, 5-gallon like homebrew system, and started homebrewing. And so anytime that he homebrewed, he'd call me. And so there's 3 of us that are sisters, call me and my sisters, and we'd go hang out with dad and we'd brew beer. And so it just kind of like started to become something we did, that then being more involved in it, became like, oh, like, how do you put all the different things together? And, and then we started growing our own hops, and then, so it kind of just evolved. And so that was the beginning of it, was like, just, hanging out in the backyard with my family brewing.
No, I love it. I had a very similar experience. To go back to what you said about Sam Adams, my brother actually went to college up that way. So we went to the Sam Adams tap room somewhere in Boston at one point. And I remember going through the tour, going to like a little private tasting room area, and they poured me a beer and they told you to close your eyes. And I closed my eyes, and they told me to pinch your nose as well. And you pinched your nose and you took a sip. And it tasted like a Hefeweizen or something like that. And then they told you to unplug your nose and try it again. And all you got was cherry. It was just a straight cherry. I think it might have been a Kolsch, actually. I think it was a cherry Kolsch. But unless you had your nose clear, you didn't get the cherry. So the sensory aspect was absolutely fascinating for me. And about at that time, I was beginning home brewing as well. And the social activity you speak of, just doing it with your dad, your sister, it's so much fun. When you guys were brewing, in the kitchen or backyard, wherever you were brewing those days, were you helping the recipe creation, or were you more so following your dad's lead?
I was like, when we first started, it wasn't any of that. It was more like I just went there to hang out with my dad and sisters, and my dad would be like, "Hey, girls, pick this up, move it over there. Hey, do this, do that." And then it was actually when I moved to Rwanda that I was like, "Oh, I should probably pay attention to what you're like." And so I came here, and there's really, very limited beer access here. There's mass-produced lager. I mean, there's plenty of mass-produced lager if you want that. And then there's homebrew here is sorghum beer and banana beer. And so
what is banana beer exactly? That sounds interesting.
It's fermented banana juice. And so it can be either like super high octane, super powerful stuff. It depends on who makes it and, how much they put into it. And sometimes it can be a mixture of sorghum and banana. Sometimes it can be a little filtered. So it's more like a banana wine than anything. It really kind of runs the gamut of what you can do with banana juice.
Interesting. Would you compare it to anything?
Oh God, I don't even. Yeah.
You've got me so intrigued right now. I have to try this. I have to try this fermented banana juice.
I can't think if there's any Rwandans on this call that you can think of something this compares to. Please put it in the comments.
I hope to try it someday. Maybe someday. I know the U.S. brewers like to find trends going on in other countries. Maybe banana beer will be the next big thing in 2021 or 2022 here in the States, and all because of you, Jessi.
No, it would be because of the people who brew it. So yeah, it's banana beer and sorghum beer, and so yeah, that's the majority of home brews. It's either that or you get like you go for a Heineken or a Mutzig or a Skol, like the mass-produced lagers. So those are our options. So if you want anything besides that, you gotta make it yourself.
So no craft breweries at all near you. What would be the quickest journey you could find a craft beer in Africa?
Nairobi.
And how long a trip would that be to acquire craft beer?
An hour and a half flight.
Oh wow! And can you bring it back with you? More importantly.
Yes, I have. I have definitely. Actually, the last trip I took, I went to South Africa for Africa Brew Conference a few months ago, and brought back 2 suitcases. One was of like ingredients and equipment that I needed, and the other was just beer. Like literally an entire suitcase maxed out to the kilo of just beer.
Wow. The things you will do for love.
Right. Well, and to come back and be able to share it with my friends that are here that, that either have never tried certain beers or missed them or just like, so we had a kind of like get together and did sampling of different beers here once I got back.
Oh, that's awesome. Absolutely. It's super cool. So to talk about your home brewing in Rwanda, you said ingredients are hard to get. So what types of things were you brewing at your house?
So during lockdown or
when you first started, interested in it all?
So when I first started, I had no idea it would turn into, sitting here talking about Rwanda's first craft brewery. It was just me. And so like, I was just bringing in like little homebrew kits, anytime I flew back and forth or somebody flew over and had room in a suitcase, I'd be like, hey, can you bring me a kit? So I was just brewing that, and it just got to the point where people knew if I was coming, there was probably a cooler that involved some good beer. And so, but then as it kind of like evolved, when I was in lockdown a year ago, like part of the original goal of Kweza was to do locally produced beers, right? So what can we use that's here that ferments? And so the lockdown just hyper accelerated that because so our borders were closed. You couldn't get shipments. The airport was closed. And so, you call a guy on a moto and he delivers you stuff. And so I had available pineapple, passion fruit. I had ginger, I had limes. And so some of our ginger beer is probably one of the most popular that we make. And And so now, so that started during lockdown. I was literally brewing in mop buckets because I only had one home brew kit, which, you know, that obviously filled up on like day one. And so I was like, what else am I going to brew in? I might as well brew stuff while I'm sitting here in the house. So I found every possible container. I had saran wrap over the top, and I had like pinholes and then cheesecloth over that to prevent like bugs. And so I was just getting creative with what can I ferment and you know, how do I iterate on that? But then also, so there's a woman, Josephine, who has joined me at Kweza. So Josephine is a Rwandan woman who's been brewing for 26 years. And so she has really brought in the use of sorghum into our brewing process. So she's been brewing with sorghum for 26 years, and that we can get here. So people harvest it, you know, and then malt it and then mill it in different ways and turn it into different beers. So the sorghum beer that is homemade is kind of like, it's very grainy and thick. I don't know how it's very kind of like milkshakey in a way, but not sweet.
Well, milkshake beers, we have them here in the States.
I've never had one. I don't know what they are like. And so I think that might have been a phenomenon after I left the country. But it's just like a thick milkshake that you're essentially, and so, and it's pretty low alcohol. And so we got the same ingredients and then used some research from a guy, Clement, who does a lot of sorghum brewing in West Africa, and then a lot of research and talking to people about just how do you brew with sorghum, because it has different different temperature needs than barley beer. So we've just been playing with all different methods and like different sourcing and coming up with different base beer. And also Bo's Brewery, who's part of the origins of the Kweza project, they created a whole recipe, you know, that uses sorghum, cassava, and barley. And so it's been a mixture of their recipe, trying out different methods, trying out different sorghum that we find. And then Josephine has an amazing taste palette. So we've been just refining based on, she'll taste it and be like, oh, let's try this or that. And so we've just been working together to come up with hybridized kind of like, how do you do something that's local products, but, you know, like Josephine's like, we need to put hops in here because we need more aroma and things that like we don't naturally have a lot of. And so we end up with these hybrids of kind of a base of Rwandan ingredients with little kind of pinches of things from different places.
Now, I know you mentioned on our past call that Josephine's mom plays a role in this process. What does she do to help you out?
So Josephine's mom is amazing. She brewed with us. Josephine's mom and her aunt brewed with us this weekend for International Women Collaboration Brew Day. And so she and her mom were, so they were living out in a more rural area. And it was after the genocide, and Josephine was like, what do I do to move on from all of this? And she said she looked out the window and saw all the sorghum and was like, well, let's work with this. So she and her mom, because her mom knew the traditional methods to making sorghum beer and to making the bittering and the yeast that is traditional. So they make it in clay pots. There's all different plants involved. And so she and her mom kind of, they made sorghum beer every day, saved up, moved themselves to Kigali, and, have been just kind of building up on that since. And so they still brew together, like I think it was a year ago, we went to Josephine's house and she and her mom showed us the real old school traditional method of making sorghum beer, and all the different ways that you can, all different like kind of roles of different things in it and process.
So that's awesome. So every home brewer in the world has that conversation at some point in time after a couple of beers, talking about someday when I own my brewery, everybody thinks about growing pro. And at what point in time did this become more than just, let me see what ingredients I can get and what I can brew, to wait, maybe this could actually be a business idea? When did you have that moment?
Well, it wasn't my idea. It was, so this project started back in 2016. There was a Kickstarter. So Beau's Brewery in Canada was having their 10-year anniversary and said, what can we do to celebrate and spread the joy of craft beer? And then they were connected to a women's entrepreneurship network, of which Fina Uwaneza, who's another Rwandan woman, so they got connected and figured out, well, let's do a craft brewery in Rwanda. So they did a—
Wait, time out for a sec. We got a Canadian brewery who quickly ends up helping a female craft brewery in Rwanda, just like that.
Yeah.
Love it.
And if you, well, we don't have a website yet. We're still working on that, but there's different articles out there that kind of go into more background. Or if you just Google Kweza, Beau's Kickstarter, you'll find the history of the project, and there's videos talking about it all. So if you're curious, check it out. And so Beau's Brewery really kind of like got this started with Fina, and they raised $85,000 US, 110,000 Canadian, and that was to get the project kickstarted. Fina ran into family issues and some other things and ended up having to step away from the project. So it kind of hit a lull. And so for about a year and a half, I think it just kind of sat quietly. I got connected through, it was partially Mass Design Group. It was through different networks that then I ended up on the phone with Steve Beauchesne, the CEO of Beau's Brewery. And so I said, well, let me see what I can do to help get this restarted, because like, if I'm going to be here as a landscape architect, I need good beer. And so anything I can do to help some other women, get this restarted, I will do this. And so it was just a lot of kind of viability testing, right? So because there's no craft brewery in the country, there's no precedent there's nowhere we can go and say, what do people drink? What are the price points? What kind of beer where do they get their equipment and their ingredients? So it was really starting from scratch and trying to figure it out. And remember, I had only ever brewed from kits at that point. So I was like, learning everything at a million miles an hour. Christian Vonderheide is one of our technical advisors, and he was the CEO of Rwanda Institute. And so I was lucky enough to be able to take some courses with Rwanda, and just really like doing everything I can. So I'd learn about it, and then I'd be like, okay, now where can I figure this out in the supply chain? And meanwhile, talking to lots of people here in Rwanda, trying to find somebody that wanted to take it on. But it's a high risk thing, right? To just like jump off into entrepreneurship land into an industry that doesn't exist yet. And so it ended up at a point, and we had a team from Oxford University that did our business plan. And so we ended up with we had tested, where do we get all the stuff? How do we do this? And we had a business plan that seemed pretty viable. And we got to the point where it said, somebody's got to do the doing. And so, the project that I was on was kind of at a good point that I could walk away from it. And so I said, okay, well, how about I take 3 months and see what I can do? That was, I think, a year and a half ago now. So it was never like I want to start a brewery. It was more of, I see problems in front of me and I want to solve them. So it was like, there's no craft brewery in the country. So I'm like, okay, well, let me see if I can start it. And it's even issues, like one of the good examples I think I talk about a lot is glass. So you need sand in order to make glass. So even just your simple pint glass, right? Like that requires sand and a production process. Rwanda is in the middle of Africa. It's landlocked. We have no sand. There's no beaches. There's no sandy rivers. And so there's no glass production in the country. So even things like, we can't get glass, but we have clay mugs. So what can we do with those? And then that went down this whole route of clay amphora and the origins and histories of brewing in clay and serving beer in clay. So it was never really like a step of I want to start a brewery. It was more like problem solving after problem solving that just got me more and more like, well, now we know that, so now we have to do this, so now we have to and it just kind of kept rolling along of its own force. And And then it was actually right at the beginning of lockdown. So 1 year ago, we got to the point where we said, we need pilot equipment. We would need investment to do this. And our first investor, Karen Coker, came on board. And so she got us really launched. We were able to buy pilot.
Exactly.
Sorry?
Jessi, who's Karen?
Karen Coker, she's one of the senior executives at Microsoft Corporation. She's in global HR, global HR head. And so she originally was a Kickstarter supporter. And so then I send out updates to Beau's original Kickstarter supporters as I go along. And so I had sent out an update last February or March saying, here we are, where we want to start, this process of pilot, and here's our plans. And we're going to be looking for investors. So if anybody's interested, please email me. And she did. And so we got talking. She's amazing. And just so supportive of kind of the whole process and about women and entrepreneurship and about Rwanda itself, because she had been here to Rwanda through Microsoft working. And so she knew the country and beer. And so, the whole thing, she was like, okay, well, how? And so she now is on our board. And, we're in touch a lot. And then so she kicked us off with really our investments. So that got us rolling. And so we not only did that enable us to buy the pilot equipment, we actually own a full scale worth of brewery equipment that's sitting in South Africa right now. And so all of the, the brew house, the fermenters, all the way through the bottling line, we own it. And it's just sitting, waiting for us to build a brewery here. And so what we're looking for now is the remainder of our investment so that we can get our brewery up and built. So it's going to be a brew pub, because Rwanda doesn't have craft beer. So it's really about the experience. It's about that Sam Adams kind of experiencing the brewing process and the ingredients that go into it, meeting Josephine and see how she brews. And so we're building this brew pub. And so we've been, bringing in investors slowly but surely. We are striving. So as far as we know, Rwanda is the first country in the world whose commercial level craft brewery industry is being started by women. And so we're also, not only are we trying to do that, we're trying to make it entirely women owned, led, brewed, and chefed. And so we're looking for other female investors and other people to contribute to our crowdfunding also, and then crowdfunding all goes also towards Josephine and future Rwandan staff equity, as well as those of us so it's myself, Deb Lett, and Josephine Uwase that are working now. So we're doing sweat equity, but also we want any crowdfunding to continue to go to Josephine's ownership of the ownership of the company. And so we're looking for different ways to just get up and going. So that's kind of our process, right? And so we're in pilot scale right now. We're 50 liters at a time doing R&D. We're working with the government, trying to get licensed. And
how does the government treat you? Because being the first craft brewery, your operation is quite different than some of the larger breweries that are operating the macro breweries. So how are they looking at you?
With a little bit of I don't know what the word would be, entertainment.
What on earth are you doing, Jessi and Josephine?
They're like, what, because, there's the two large breweries, which, you guys out there in the craft beer world know it's not what a craft brewery is. So they produce millions of liters of beer, right? And we're not, nor are we a restaurant, we are making beer. And so trying to figure out how to regulate us and how to tax us and how to do all those things is kind of, we're working with them. We're using some East African standards. So Kenya and Tanzania and have different standards already written out that, for example, the beer quality standards. And so we're following some kind of regional things. And then we're also drawing on international things. So working with the Rwandan Food and Drug Administration on things like expiration dates and stuff, and being able to get the documentation behind how do you know what the expiration date is, and how do you ensure people's, you won't make people sick, and that you can ensure the quality and integrity of your product. So we're working with them a lot on just kind of how do other places regulate so that Rwanda can also figure that out, and so that we can hopefully launch an industry, because hopefully we're not the only ones. Rising tide raises all boats. So hopefully behind us, and maybe we'll incubate them, who knows, being able to get more of a craft beer scene going, so that when you come to, because Rwanda is already a great place to come to and to live in and to be from. So adding another just thing to do here, another way to get together socially and use all the agricultural products that are grown here.
Awesome. Now, while you're kickstarting the Rwandan craft beer economy, what is the drink of choice for people in Rwanda these days? I mean, I know there's the macro brewers, but, is macro beer what people are going to when they want an alcoholic beverage, or what's the favorite?
Well, I mean, if you're a beer drinker, the discussion is Mutzig or Skol. Like, those are the two choices, really. And then, or if you have a couple more dollars, you get the Heineken or some Amstel if it's around. Otherwise, it's a lot of cocktail drinking. And so there's, that's the other way of things. And not so much wine, even though we can get great wine because from South Africa, but the Rwandan taxation is set up to really protect Rwandans and protect Rwandan economy. So, prices on things like imported wine is very high. So again, it's like, that's part of the reason we're doing local ingredients. One, it's ethically what we want to do. We want to source from women's co-ops and get our ingredients and make beer out of it. And also financially, it makes sense because of the tax structure that the Rwandan government has set up. So that's what we're trying for.
Fascinating. So with regard to your ingredients, I mean, I know you've mentioned you have equipment coming from South Africa and you're ready for your building and the equipment will come up, but how are you sourcing all your local ingredients, and what's the process like, and will it be scalable as you continue to grow?
Yeah. So if it's like barley malts, for example, we import them from Dematec. They're the only craft brewery supplier in East Africa right now. They're in Nairobi. So our equipment came in overland from Nairobi. So overland from Nairobi up through Uganda, over the Nile into Rwanda. If you look back in our Twitter, because that's what we do here, you can, the driver actually took pictures of the whole journey from Nairobi to Rwanda, including crossing a bridge over the Nile in the middle of the night. And so that's, if we need things like imported ingredients, that's how it arrives. But for local ingredients, so Josephine, because she's been brewing for so long, has sources she goes to. So she goes to the market, she knows which women to go to, and who has the good products. So Kimironko Market is the big kind of fresh produce market here in Kigali. And that's where she goes for finding, like, if we're making a brew with sorghum, cassava, or ginger, or the local ingredients, or even just sugar and different things. That's where we source it from.
Awesome. Now, what are you currently brewing right now on your pilot system?
Right now, actually, we have the Glow and Pink Boots collab brew that we made on Saturday with Josephine and her mom and her aunt. So we made a sorghum beer base, and then put on the Yakima Chiefs hop blend onto that. And so, we'll see how that comes out. Because our last sorghum beer, we did a hybrid and made a mango goza on it. And that one's almost done because, man, people love it. So they take a sip and...
I imagine a goza is not a style you typically see in Rwanda. So the educational curve for all your products, I imagine, is probably pretty high, but a fascinating part of the story.
Yeah, and actually, Josephine started her Cicerone training today, and so because she's just like loved the whole learning aspect of, because she knows traditional beer, but she's loved like kind of finding out different ways that we can do different things, and so and now as she sees different ways to handle things and how the flavors come together, she's starting to get creative and come up with like, well, let's mix this and that and try this. So it's a little bit of kind of like bringing different styles to different ingredients, but then also coming up with we have a pineapple passion fruit beer. It's kind of like it's a mimosa beer. It tastes like a mimosa except in beer form. And then, our ginger beer. So those are things that we start fermenting them and see what happens. And then we just keep iterating on the process. And obviously, so using all the process of the different testing and everything so applying brewing kind of technology to trying out new things and coming up with them and making sure everything is, up to standards and can be licensed and everything. So we're having fun kind of mixing different processes and ingredients and seeing what comes out.
Awesome. So what's your timeline like for hoping to have the brew pub open?
We're aiming for a groundbreaking in June and to be brewing on the larger system by September, October. And it should all go well. We want to have the full brew pub experience open by the end of 2021.
And what's that food menu going to be like? I know you're making me thirsty, but now make me hungry.
So Deb Lett's our chef, and she's been in Rwanda. She's a Zimbabwean woman who's trained and chefed all around the world. And she's been here in Rwanda for 11 years. And so she's working on the menu of everything so she's used our stout and she braised pork in it and then made drunken pork pie. And then that was based off Fraser's Follies, recipe using the Black is Beautiful beer that we made. It was like pulling from all these cool things and coming up with also a food in the middle of it that tied it all together. And so things like, ginger chicken wings or cheese samosas that go well with IPAs. And so we're just now starting to really get into those pairings. And she's also working on natural sodas because half of Rwanda doesn't drink. The other half makes up for it. We're the second highest per capita drinkers on the continent. Yeah, so this is part of the reason we think a brewery will do well. But half of the population does not drink, and we want them to have a craft experience also. And so being able to make natural sodas, again, with all the fruits and everything we have here, is something else that Deb is working on to bring in to have a full Kweza experience.
And I'm sure they'll be delicious. And, just talking to you, there's so many different aspects of your story that just get me interested. I mean, your entrepreneur's journey is just fascinating, how you saw the problem, jumped in to help, and have made an amazing business. But I mean, I really think your mission is what makes you truly stand out. Sure, you're the first craft brewery in Rwanda, you're female-led, but just your ideals and values are so impressive to me. When we first spoke, you told me that people are driven by their values. Why does it make them do or not do something? And that really stuck with me because, you're doing it to make a difference. What are your ultimate goals with Kweza?
Oh, good question. So the thing that lights a fire under me and gets me up in the morning is some scary statistics. So, so currently only 2.3% of global venture capital funding goes to female founders. 2.3%. Wow. Last year it was 2.7. It actually has gone down during the pandemic to 2.3%. And so that's one aspect. And then things like out of the top 50 angel investors in the world, only 2 of them are women. And never mind when we get into and white and non-white. And so the fact of the matter is the majority of the capital in the world sits in white men's hands, right? And so what we really want to do is to try to add to the pool of investors with other people. So how can we add women? How can we add people of color? How can we ensure that other people are building wealth and can make decisions about their own lives and on investment? So it was kind of a shock to me. I mean, I know that in theory it makes sense, but really getting into entrepreneurship, I realized that because we want to be women-owned, women-led, women-brewed, finding female investors is very hard. And so really what part of our mission is to get wealth into women's hands to help build generational equity so that people of color can make decisions about the next businesses to get started. So because statistically it's, white men hold wealth and then also tend to invest it in other white men. And it's not to say that white men are evil in any way, shape, or form. It's just to say, like, let's diversify this. Let's add to women's wealth. Let's add to people of color's wealth. Let's diversify this, because so it basically means that white men are making the majority of decisions around the world about what businesses get a chance to get started and don't. Because, like, we're small in comparison to, a lot of startups, but we need capital to build our building. And so who has that? And then, provided that we're successful, who will gain that wealth back and be able to then reinvest that in something else? We want that to be women. And so really what we're trying to do is to start a successful business. And, itself on its own, and its model, yeah, we're making good beer and we have a great experience, but underlying it all, we really want to build up women's wealth, and kind of start to add more women to the investor pool around the world. So I'd say that, yeah, that's what kind of gets me fired up and out of bed in the morning, is figuring out how we can use beer as a vehicle to anything from getting more women into investor pools to how do we even use different biodiversity plants. Use different plants in order to make beer that then, supports biodiversity in Rwanda. And so, really just using beer as a vehicle for other kind of things that I think are valuable.
I absolutely love how you're using your platform. You're so early stage, but your goals are so impressive and important. I mean, they're the critical issues we need to be talking about right now. So how much money is Kweza looking to fundraise for the rest of the project?
So we need a total of $350,000 more. And we're looking at a variety of investors, crowdfunding, founders clubs. And so, yeah, if anybody's out there interested in investing, give me a call, and I'd be happy to tell you more about the Kweza story. And especially, we are trying to prioritize women first in the investment rounds. And so, that's the challenge. Can we do this? Can we start a brewery based on women investing and in crowdfunding, so that if you have $5, then it goes, and a whole bunch of people have $5, then that goes towards Josephine's equity in the company. So we're looking at all different ways of bringing it in and getting a building up and out of the ground and having some nice beer gardens that overlook Kigali to have a nice beer in.
From Josephine's perspective, did she ever think she'd be opening the first craft brewery in Rwanda? Or how does she wake up each day? What goes through her mind when she heads to work with you?
I don't know. She'd have to speak for herself on that front. But whenever I ask her or other media asks her about, what's the best part, and so far she just says she loves learning about it all, because she's a sponge and just takes in. She speaks, I think the other day, 7 languages. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and she does a plethora of things, and so she's just always trying to learn more, and then she turns around and applies it in really unique ways. And in talking with her, talking about investment and things, so for example, she has some family members that are interested in potentially investing, but they're men, right? And so she's like, let's try to get all women before we let them in.
You're our last resort.
So I was like, all right, ma'am. So I think that she really does enjoy being kind of like leading a thing. And she was on, the picture on the Forbes magazine article, and she was just so thrilled. She spent the whole day kind of like just smiling and then, showing friends and stuff. And so it's like, I'm just glad too that because she's been doing this for so many years and has such a great talent. And so I'm glad that she's able to kind of get recognized and hopefully help build up, her generational wealth. And again, so that she can be a decision maker, in that way in the future also.
That is absolutely amazing. I hope someday to try Josephine and your beer. I'm looking forward to it because I will make it out to Rwanda at one point. In better times, travel is what keeps me going. So I look forward to sharing a pint with both of you in person someday. So for anyone looking to get, involved in the project, is there an active fundraising campaign going, or should they reach out just direct to you?
Yeah, well, there's so if you go to any of our social media, and then the links at the top should bring you to we have a crowdfunder under Shine Registry. So this is so for women, normally if we get married or have babies, we have showers, right? And so what Shine Registry has done is the founders created a business shower platform. So just like having a baby or a wedding is a major life milestone, so is starting a business for a woman. And so this is a way that people can contribute. And so we have a registry on Shine Registry. And it's everything from, $20 to help us buy a bag of sorghum to, to helping to sponsor somebody to take the Cicerone training, to helping us build our building. So there's different ways to kind of donate and crowdfund, and then any of that cash that comes in that way, that's what goes towards Josephine's equity on top of her kind of company equity. And then in addition, if there's just interest in learning more about investment in Kweza, then email me, call me. I'm at kwezabrewery@gmail.com. And so that's, I'd be happy to talk to anyone or explain anything about Kweza. And then also if it's during the day and because we still have curfew and lockdown here, also happy to get on the phone. We can have Josephine talk about Kweza also. So yeah, there's different ways to reach out to us. And we're happy that people have reached out through social media, through emails, through calling. We'll talk to you anyway you want to talk about Kweza.
I absolutely love what you're doing, just helping generational wealth with women, in Rwanda and worldwide. You're going to make a difference just by educating, Jessi. It's amazing to think, just a handful of years ago, let's say you were in Peace Corps, and now you're starting the first female-led craft brewery in Rwanda. It's absolutely fascinating. I cannot absolutely wait to have a beer with you in person, because we've had so many stories. I've listened to you so much in these conversations, and I could talk for hours with you, but I can't even imagine how many stories are going to come out when we actually get to share a beer in person.
Well, you're going to have to come and help make the stories.
I'm going to come. I'm going to take part in the process, and I can't wait. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'll let you go to bed now. I know it might be getting late there. So I can't wait to follow the progress. I know everybody listening can't wait to follow the same. So good luck getting open. I mean, June's going to be here before we know it for the groundbreaking. And in September, hopefully that brew pub will be open. We'll be having a delicious meal and a delicious pint and a clay mug. So can't wait for you. I'm so happy for you. So cheers, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
See ya.
Talk to you later.